What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you feeling the complete antithesis of thermonuclear AF. Thanks to everyone who reached out in our Discord. I've been sick for the past few days, and I feel like I'm behind like 2 to 3 weeks after being sick for 2 to 3 days. We were officially in power through mode because the work was piling up, and I haven't after putting out 5 episodes over the weekend, I haven't put out one since Sunday. So here we are going to dive into a mailbag very quickly. If this is your first time checking us out, I promise I normally come with more energy, but I am flat out exhausted. Remember to subscribe, though, if you have not already. Hit the sub button on YouTube, like and comment to help the algorithm love us back. Follow us wherever you get your audio podcast, whether that's Spotify, Apple, anywhere else. And ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts help us out a ton. Ratings on Spotify help us out a ton. Join our Discord. As I mentioned, the link to that is in the podcast and YouTube descriptions, or you can DM me on Twitter for some reason if it's not working. You can also follow us and should follow us on our socials at HardwoodKnocks on Twitter and TikTok, at Hardwood_Knocks on Instagram, and shop our merch. I think I'm wearing a Hardwood Knocks hoodie right now. That's the best way to support the show. The store link is in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. And again, if you have, Hardwood Knocks swag, tag me in it on Twitter or Instagram, throw it up in Discord. I can send the picture over to one of the other social media platforms. We really appreciate it. And finally, the biggest way to grow the show at this point, especially with Twitter dying, is word of mouth. So if this is your first time checking us out, or if you've been checking us out, recommend it to a friend, family member, acquaintance, coworker, random person that you know on social media or wherever who might like a sub-mediocre, typically more energetic than this Hoops podcast. I believe that is everything. Although our TikTok has been growing, we are almost at 2,000 followers. If you found us on TikTok and that actually converted you to a listener on Hardwood Knocks, let me know in the TikTok comments or somewhere here, our Discord, another social media platform, or sorry, as my notifications go off here. All right, let's dive into this mailbag. We have a Damian Lillard question, but let's address what's going on with Damian Lillard first before we go into it. So the latest is kind of the status quo, just that he really wants to go to Miami, and that the report for Woj, where he actually really wrote about it, like for Woj to write again. I feel like I haven't seen a column like that from him in forever. But he mentioned, reported, whatever, that general manager Joe Cronin is not going to trade Damian Lillard wherever he wants to go. That could be posturing, but Damian Lillard clearly really wants to go to Miami. His agents himself are pushing to go to Miami. They are trying to dissuade other teams who might want to acquire him from acquiring him in the first place because he doesn't want to play there. This is all typical stuff, but the debate sort of mutated into this morality conversation where it's, well, the league needs to change and how could Dame do this to the Blazers, this and that. So I want to reiterate a few things that I kind of touched on in the first Damian Lillard trade podcast, but I just want to illuminate further here. This stuff happens all the time. And forget about Bradley Beal's no trade clause. That's never, I'll be shocked if, I don't know who the next NBA player is to get a no trade clause, but it's going to have to be someone absolutely transcendent because that was a disaster for Washington. But forget about that. That's a different type of market. It's franchises and stars, even when they have years left on their deal, typically work with one another. Even when it's more combative, stars still hold leverage, where Anthony Davis trying to request out more in advance of free agency than we had necessarily seen at the time. They shopped him around to other teams and he had more than one team on his list. I think Boston was on there for a minute, but I think it eventually fell off, and maybe it was just the Lakers. The Knicks might have been tangentially on there or whatever. This stuff is normal, and I don't think that the way that people are reacting is wow, Damian Lillard's all of a sudden a terrible person. He's trying to burn down the Blazers. I don't have an issue with, and this is how people have compared it. When teams decide to trade players under contract, that's part of the gig. That's part of why they get paid so much money. If there's not a no trade clause or some understanding with the team, that's just, so be it. That's the nature of the job. When it comes to a player asking for out with a bunch of years left on his deal, it's obviously a little bit more finicky because they kind of gave up that right to force their way out in theory by signing said contract. But teams still, when you have the leverage to ask for out, they tend to acquiesce. And I don't have an issue with players doing that. I don't have an issue with them giving teams a wish list. I don't have an issue with them trying to dissuade technically other teams from trading for them, so long as it doesn't actually impede the trade or the return for them. And that's where I'm kind of taking issue with this. And it's not just Damian Lillard. It's a larger symptom of this trade request process is you're narrowing down the pool of potential suitors, because I don't know how many teams are going to do what Oklahoma City did with Paul George or with Kawhi Leonard when the Raptors acquired him, and go sort of rogue where the star wants out. You're not on his list. You're not even on the purview of his list. You require him anyway. I think a few things come into play is that stars have more leverage now, and it seems like they are able to, not that they're able, but they might be more forceful about their situation. Where would Damian Lillard report? I think he would. Would he loaf around like James Harden? No, I don't think so. But that threat is there. And now you're paying these guys just so much money. The number is so exorbitant, especially when, yes, it's a percentage of the salary cap. When he gets to 59 million in 26, 27, it's a percentage of the salary cap that, it seems like a lot in just raw dollar amount. When the salary cap is 170 or 180, whatever it is at that point, it won't seem so huge. That number is just so monstrous when you're dealing with 35% maxes and super max contracts, let's say, to have to take on those guys. It's different when it's Paul George. And was he on his second contract or third contract? But it wasn't just this gargantuan number. And the ditto for Kawhi Leonard. I think he was only on his second contract at the time, post rookie scale deal. Maybe I'm wrong there though. So then when the number is this massive, it's going to cause more pause, and it gives the player more leverage. And the fact that Damian Lillard chose to sign extensions with this Blazers organization in a precarious situation with this undefined direction, and then changed his mind, I don't like the idea that, not that he shouldn't have agency in the matter. And if the team wants to work with him, so be it. I wouldn't, because I think that sets back the franchise. But him, limiting them to one team and then trying to dissuade other teams, and not him, but also his agents. I get that it's sort of part of the game here, but we've now reached a point where it can be an active detriment to these teams that are trying to rebuild and retool their rosters. Are you going to have to accept an inferior return? And I happen to believe that the Heat's best offer, if they can renegotiate that OKC protection in 25 to 26, I think 3 first-round picks, 3 swaps, Tyler Hero, Jaime Jaquez, and Nikola Jovic, like, as a baseline, is maybe it's not the best offer that'll be out there, but it might be the best offer that's out there. And you might not even get that Miami offer because of the way that Lillard's playing his hand here. And when you have 4 years and $208+ million left on your deal, an extension that you signed, that per Woj you pursued, was the word that Woj used. That's where I sort of take issue with it, where you're changing the shape and scope of your trade market to this degree. It's even different if you're going to give them more than 2 or 3 teams. And I think I would have taken, now here's where it's going to differ, is Kevin Durant didn't catch as much shit when this happened in Brooklyn, in part because when you look at the team that he limited it to, look at what they were able to give up. And that was considered a caps lock haul. And the Heat's, the return, if you send Dame to Miami, to me, is not going to be on par with Mikal Bridges and Phoenix's draft when you're going that far out. And maybe I'm misevaluating that package, but that's also still part of the problem. Shame on me, shame on us in general. If we weren't, I think I didn't make jokes, but there was definitely a discussion that we had on this podcast about how did Phoenix lose this? Did Phoenix lose this negotiation despite there being only a market of 1? But was there only a market of 1 because Brooklyn wanted to give Phoenix the chance to give the ante up, and then they were going to explore additional offers and the marketplace elsewhere, either that season or over the summer? We can't be sure, but because you're able to get the asking price that you set, where it does seem like Miami's haggling even more, because look, Damian Lillard's not Kevin Durant, but the idea of stars who have signed extensions, it's not, and I'm not even talking about, forget the first contract after that rookie scale, like, you're kind of just beholden to take it. Anthony Edwards was never going to turn down max money from the Timberwolves if he wasn't happy in Minnesota, because that's his first chance to get put 8. I'm not saying he's not happy in Minnesota, but that's how those people worried about when they were worried about LaMelo Ball or Zion Williamson sort of doing the same thing. It's just never going to happen. But I'm talking about, like, you're past that contract. You've signed others. And now in Damian Lillard's case, in Kevin Durant's case, you've signed an extension with these teams under these terms of how they were built. And in Brooklyn's case, yeah, the shape, the form of their team had changed. That's on Kevin Durant, because he first spearheaded the change to it, and then he tethered it to 2 stars who didn't mesh together, and one in Kyrie Irving who was just so mercurial that he submarined the entire thing. And so I don't view it as sort of the NBA forcing these players into no-win situations, or it's a double standard when it's, oh, Damian Lillard can't request a trade. No, I don't have an issue with that. I also don't have an issue with the franchise working with him or him giving them a wish list. But when it comes down to you're able to dictate just the one team you're going to, then you should have let yourself reach free agency, or you should have requested out when you only had a year left on your deal rather than signing extensions. It's, if you want to have a conversation about, does the NBA need to abolish the draft because it's not fair that these guys don't get to pick where they end up until X amount of years into the league? That's a really tough discussion to have. I don't think it's really pertinent here, but it doesn't apply. Because it doesn't apply here. Damian Lillard has signed multiple extensions with the Blazers now. And so if I'm the Blazers, I'm making the best trade for the Blazers as Joe Cronin. The issue here is I don't know how many teams are willing to pony up, in part because of Damian Lillard's age, but also just in part because, yes, some of the appeal is, okay, he's under contract for another 4 years, but that's also because these deals are getting so massive. That's also some of the drawback for certain organizations. And so you were going to winnow out some suitors, even if it was open season on Dame. Let's just say he didn't have restrictions. You're going to winnow down the list of suitors just by default there. And so if you're then limiting it to only contenders, and he's saying, oh, only Miami or Brooklyn, where I don't know if Brooklyn would be a contender with Dame. My educated guesstimate would be an aggressive no. They won't get there. But if he wants to play Mikal Bridges, more power to him. Mikal Bridges seems like a fantastic teammate. So does Cam Johnson, by the way. But when you're already inherently limited because of the salary structure of this player, which, look, no sympathy for the teams here. They signed Damian Lillard to this contract. They didn't have to give him that extension. They know that he could have asked her out. They know what type of leverage he might have had later on in this deal. And so there is a level of, okay, we don't need to skew too far towards siding with the team here. I just don't like the idea of when we've already eliminated top tier players leaving in free agency for the most part, where Fred VanVleet feels like the biggest name that's ever going to shift unless something changes on the open market. And now you're sort of taking away, free agency was always rigged in the sense that these bigger markets were always going to have a heavy advantage. And now more of these glamour markets or flagship franchises, or let's say just the usual suspects when it comes to teams that would be willing to pony up a lot of assets for trades, it's going to be the same teams a lot of the time. And so you're removing other squads that might be willing to take a chance, like an OKC, spoiler alert, or a New Orleans, I'm just spitballing here, like that are actual pitch for them, maybe a Toronto, like they did with Kawhi, and as OKC did with PG, and even Utah. So they've been kind of in the mix on the periphery, but they've only called and had exploratory talks with Portland. And I'm not saying that it's patently, then Dame should want to go to Utah. I mean, it'd be funny. I just want one of these guys to go to the basketball nerddom spot. No, I want to go to OKC, be a part, or I want to go to San Antonio, which Damian Lillard, the franchise Damian Lillard, has a deep respect for, whatever the heck that means. And I'm not saying he should want to go somewhere that's completely shirking his timeline. I think let's use San Antonio and even Utah as an example. Are those two teams immediate contenders with Wemby and Dame as their top two players in San Antonio? Or if it's Dame and let's say they keep Kessler and Lauri Markkanen as part of that trade, are those teams contenders? I'd argue no. But like in OKC, a New Orleans, if they decided to get involved, then yeah. And so I don't like that this part of the process, and I don't know what the solve is. I honestly, this new CBA it seems like more harsher fines where agents can even be penalized, and players for, agents can be penalized if they're issuing public trade requests on behalf of their clients. And I don't really know how that factors in when you're kind of being open about it and like all these reports are leaking out, but does that count unless you just come out and make a statement and say that Aaron Goodwin has said that Damian Lillard doesn't want to be in Portland anymore? So I don't know what the solve is. I just think it's unfortunate that anyone who's using this is sort of a measuring stick of morality for Damian Lillard about a person, let alone never mind a basketball player, but a person. That's kind of bullshit. But I also think that we need to open our eyes and say, okay, like if these players, they've signed extensions by choice and they had all the leverage to begin with and are now exerting leverage in such a way where they're not only dictating their wish list, but they're dictating the exact destination and the type of package that you're going to get for them. And look, the way it's set up right now, I understand that. If you're Damian Lillard, although I haven't heard too much of this when it comes to the Heat, but if you're Damian Lillard, you don't want the Heat, for instance, to bankrupt themselves, because you want something left to actually contend with. And I think you kind of go into this and acknowledge that in Bradley Beal's case, yeah, they're just going to be, asset poor when it comes to draft picks and young players. And they already were asset poor when it came to young players. You don't want to then see, okay, if they don't have to give up DeAndre, and maybe Washington was never interested in him. I get why he would push for that not to have happened. So I understand everything that's going on from the players' side here, but I do think that players need to be more realistic. If you've chosen to sign these extensions and you're the one asking for out, that there needs to be, can you set an arbitrary minimum of like 5 teams that you at least need to pick? And then you could look, there'd be runarounds around that. Damian Lillard could just say the Lakers, the Clippers, and Miami and Brooklyn and so forth. And, the Clippers and Lakers can't really give you realistic packages anyway. And so I don't know what the solve is here, but I'm all for other teams getting involved and taking chances. I just feel like the current climate is unfairly prohibitive to what when you look at the salaries and just the agency, not the agency, but the way that players are now delivering demands or requests, as you call them. And this is, again, not Damian Lillard specific. I worry that it's going to deter those out of left field candidates from coming in and deciding, hey, we're ready to accelerate our time. Like, what if the Magic kind of decided that Damian Lillard was the guy? I'm not advocating for that, even though I already have. I want to see more of that. Randomness is part of what makes the trade market interesting. And because some people hate the transactions of this league or think that they're overcovered, and I think both sides have points. Like, I don't know. I want to both sides that argument. But the transaction game has been largely neutered in a sense where, yeah, free agency and trades are still covered like they're this big to do. The free agency is not a big to do anymore. It's almost impossible to hand out bad deals, unless you're paying Dylan Brooks $80 million over 4 years or deciding to give your entire mini MLE to Reggie Jackson with a player option. But we're not talking about back-breaking deals. Jeremy Grant's was like the longest one that's been given out over the offseason. Non-extension, of course. It's just kind of a plug-and-play guy that can be moved. I disagree with people who think that it's going to be like this net positive asset, but it's not the end of the world. And you look at even Fred VanVleet, it's a max, but it's only 2 years guaranteed. Bruce Brown getting that massive salary, but it's only for 1 year guaranteed. And so it's almost impossible to see these big names, one, reach free agency, then two, leave in free agency. And then in free agency itself, you're not witnessing all these, big deals or even like this marquee player movement because teams understand asset preservation, and the extension rules were loosened on purpose because they wanted players to stay in their current markets. But then them signing extensions and agitating for out later, again, I'm fine with it. I just don't like the idea of them being able to create these uber specific mandates where it's not something that's collaborative and it's not a wish list of preferred destinations that's extensive, that's maybe ranking 10 teams or whatever, that it's just this one team or these two teams. And I think that's where I diverge from the whole, Damian Lillard is well within his rights to do whatever he wants here. And look, technically he is. I just don't have to like it. And it's not just Damian Lillard specific. Of course, that was longer than expected because it's me, but let's move to this question from Christopher, which is a fact. I've been campaigning for it, but not the question itself. But Christopher asked, not saying it's going to happen, but with plenty of young players and all the draft picks in the world, what do you think a trade package for Dame to OKC would look like? So a few variables come into play here. One, knowing that Dame doesn't want to play in Oklahoma City, at least, as far as we can tell at this point. Two, your offer is going to reflect that market of, one, he doesn't want to play for you, and two, that other teams probably aren't going to come close to meeting what you would want because he has such a finite wish list. The third variable for me would be, if you're OKC, if you're a team that's really going to attempting to accelerate their timeline, part of the appeal of Damian Lillard is, yes, he's under contract, but that can also be for 4 years, but that can also be part of the drawback. Like I said, 4 years at $200+ million, $208+ million. He's going into his age 33 season. I think it's going to be next year for him. Yeah, he's about to turn 33. That can be a deterrent in theory. But you're viewing that against the backdrop of, okay, we're not on his list and the market is not going to necessitate that we go over the top. And then finally, you also have to look at it as, if we are acquiring him to accelerate our timeline, a huge part of that appeal is rooted in, okay, Damian Lillard is with our core and we're not going to bust up our entire core to get him. And so immediately I take that to view as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander off limits, Chet Holmgren off limits. Now you start to get into some interesting names. Jalen Williams, I'm putting him off limits because you're going to need wing defense there. After that, you can't just put, red tape on everyone and say off limits. Josh Giddey would need to be on the table, Kaysen Wallace, Ousmane Dieng, and even Lou Dort. Now, if I'm the Blazers, though, I think what gets interesting is there are two, issues here, or two things to tackle before we flesh out a package. And I have an exact one that I think is at least a fair framework. Let's start with the Lou Dort thing. His contract is a bargain. I remember the sticker shock some people had when he signed it. And now it's just like, you look at the cap rising and this dude is still on the right side of 25. He's never going to make more than 17.7 million. The final year is a team option. He has four more years of team control. One of the most elite perimeter defenders. He can be an offensive misadventure, but we've seen him go on heaters from three specifically. You have to ask yourself, do you want Lou Dort or do you want extra drafts or prospect compensation? And so if I'm Portland, I'm going to skew towards I want the picks. But you also have to take into consideration, okay, Josh Giddey is such a high-end prospect at this point with 2 years left on his rookie scale. Good defender, great size at 6'8", good rebounder. It really improved his shooting and just off-ball work, watching him play alongside SGA this year a lot. That's going to be not an opportunity cost, but that's going to take up real equity. It's not the same as getting 2 of those Miami Heat first-round picks that are probably going to convey in the late 20s. And now you're Portland. And so you look at Josh Giddey. He is 6'8". And I think just reasonably, when you go through the Thunder's 3 most important players, SGA, I would say Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren. Maybe I'm overvaluating Jalen Williams, wing J-Dub, or wing Jalen Williams, whatever you want to call him. But it also, there's going to be overlap if you have Damian Lillard coming in and then you have Josh Giddey and SGA and Case and Wallace. So do the Blazers want Josh Giddey? And in theory, yeah, he's 6'8". You could play him with Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson. That's just an Anthony Simons, mix and match those guys. But that's like a lot of different. Like, I'd be really interested in seeing a Giddey, Sharpe, Henderson lineup. Fuck it, like throw Simons out there, make Giddey the 4. But that's just a lot of guys who prefer to operate on the ball. 3 of them, I guess you could say 4. All 4 would. But Simons works off the ball. Sharpe should be fine off the ball. But Henderson and Giddey, there's a lot of overlap there. Now, if you want Giddey, that's fine. But I view this as you probably need to find a third team to go after Josh Giddey that's going to send interesting player X and a first-round pick or something. And then you flesh out the package from there. So I'm going to see if I can throw the package I have up on screen, and then I will read it off once it's there. It's a little preview of something I actually wrote about. So I had to write about this trade package. It should be up by the time this is live, so you're not seeing too far behind the curtain, although you are seeing behind the curtain. So 3-team trade involving the Spurs. The Blazers get Davis Bertans, who has 22-ish million guaranteed over the next 2 seasons. Ousmane Dieng, Keldon Johnson, a 2024 first rounder, most favorable of the 4 that OKC could own between Houston, the Clippers, OKC, and Utah. Chicago's 2025 first round pick. It's top 10 protected, comes via San Antonio. And then Houston's 2026 first round pick, which is top 4 protected. Oklahoma City would receive Damian Lillard. This trade needs to take place, I think, on August 29th, when everyone can be aggregated. The Spurs get Josh Giddey, Victor Oladipo's expiring contract. And so in essence, when you look at this from like every side, Oklahoma City is getting rid of Davis Bertans and Victor Oladipo, then giving up Ousmane Dieng, Josh Giddey, and 3 first-round picks for Damian Lillard. That's a pretty substantial amount to give up. And if you're San Antonio, you look at this through the lens of, okay, is giving up Keldon Johnson and that Chicago pick worth Josh Giddey? I really like his fit in San Antonio. Maybe you'd like his from scratch off the dribble creation more if he was banging in off the bounce jumpers. He's a really depth passer, good rebounder, great size. Hopefully stretches the floor enough at this point to where he's not going to shrink it any more than a Trey Jones would, and he's going to give you more on defense in the glass there. And then if you're Portland, okay, you're taking on Davis Bertans, but you get Ousmane Dieng, Keldon Johnson, whose 4-year extension is going to be one of the best in the league, and he's only 23 years old. And then you're getting 3 first-round picks. I think it's also actually OKC's cost was 2 first-round picks, Ousmane Dieng and Josh Giddey. Now, there are ways that you could mix and match here where it's okay. If Portland wants Lou Dort, you have that conversation. If they want Josh Giddey themselves, you can cut out the middleman from San Antonio. So there are different machinations here, and OKC just has picks for days they could include. I mean, if they want to include that Denver 2027 top 5 protected pick as sort of an add-on. But if you're Portland, knowing what you can get from Miami and what other teams who are not Miami are offering you is long-term cap relief plus Ousmane Dieng, Keldon Johnson, and 3 first-round picks, a haul. And I think it's a reasonable haul in this case. And so that would be the package I would try to structure if I was Oklahoma City. And it's, again, there could be different iterations of it, but the Thunder standpoint, I think 2 first-round picks, Ousmane Dieng and Josh Giddey is a good place to start. If you think there needs to be more pick equity coming from them, I think we have to maybe sort of reevaluate which players are involved, or do you just include Lou Dort and you pull back on Josh Giddey or Ousmane Dieng in general? I think look, Ousmane Dieng's a really interesting wing to me, like sort of a connective guy at both ends of the floor. And I know he had that wrist stuff this year, or the hand stuff, whatever it was, that really limited him. But I kind of liked what I saw a lot of the time, especially pre-second injury, pre-first injury, whatever it was. So I think that's a fair package. I would love to see OKC go for it. Now, of course, this is all moot, and we shouldn't spend any more time on it because they absolutely won't. It's Oklahoma City, but that's the package. And then you're left with a core of, and look, I think that's a reasonable offer. And they have more picks to include if you need that. And they're not giving up scrubs in that deal. They have Kaysen Wallace or Alexei Pokusevsky if Portland really wants him, or another team wants him to facilitate. They could reasonably build a Damian Lillard trade package while having Lou Dort, SGA, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. And so you're just pairing those dudes with Damian Lillard. That's just absolutely outrageous in this scenario. You could also build deals where maybe Yusuf Nurkic is going back to San Antonio in that sort of version of it. You'd have to expand it where, okay, they're taking Dort. Can you send Nurkic to San Antonio? But what are they pulling back? Are you not getting as much first round equity because that's staying with San Antonio or going back to OKC? But yeah, that's I think Dieng, Josh Giddey, and 2 first-round picks, and maybe you go to a third if you're Portland. Let's say the Spurs just aren't involved and they're not sending Keldon Johnson. And if you can get 3 first-round picks, Dieng and Keldon Johnson for Dame at this point, I think I like that offer better than Miami's, especially because the Hero, Simon, Sharp, Henderson fit is just weird, even if you think you can move Hero later. Let's move on to some non-Damian Lillard related questions. Austin asks, who are the best available options and where are they headed? I'm assuming you're talking about free agency, and let's hope that this is like not too dated by the time it comes out on Friday morning. So 6 names I have circled here. I'm not ranking them in any particular order. First is just PJ Washington, restricted. He probably goes back to Charlotte, but the Spurs could be fun. I think they have like 16 plus million in cap space, or even if it was like they could work out a sign and trade. So I can't really think of another team, and I think it's just because of how the cap is dried up here, and I'm not really in the business of thinking about sign and trade destinations right now. Ayo Dosunmu, one of my favorites, can defend basically 1 through 4, and if the shot comes around, it was fine as a rookie, dipped off last year, can still finish around the rim and keep the ball moving. I don't know what it takes to get him. He's an early bird RFA, but the Bulls signed Javon Carter. They re-signed Kobe White. They have DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine and Alex Caruso. So, like, I don't think you're just going to get him for the minimum. I would assume Chicago keeps him around, but if that was it, like a Boston, Dallas and San Antonio have a bunch of wiggle room, so those teams can make sense. Kelly Oubre Jr. is still floating around out there after missing out on Matisse Thybulle. Oubre doesn't provide nearly as much defense, but just as a wing archetype, he could make sense in Dallas. Charlotte, of course. Utah, maybe. Just they need more wings in there. He's not a pure wing, but he's like closer than a Larry Marketing to a pure wing. Christian Wood is weird. I can't come up with a market for him. I don't even know like what type of money is he getting at this point. I don't think it's going to be from Dallas. Brooklyn would be interesting, but they're still in the taxes of right now. Charlotte, maybe. OKC in theory, but they just have that monster roster crunch at this point with all their transactioning. Portland, maybe post Dame trade. Is that like a destination? I'm struggling with Christian Wood. Doesn't like make a like Boston could have maybe considered him instead of Kristaps going all in on a Kristaps Porzingis trade, but you're just not going to get anywhere near the level of defense / rim protection. Javonte Green is just one of my favorites. I don't think he would rank maybe in the top 10 of available names for most people. I think he'd be a steal for anyone. Denver is sort of a Bruce Brown replacement on defense, someone who has the positional malleability there, maybe even can guard up and even bigger wings than we saw from Bruce Brown. And if his threes fall at the clip they were before his injury this year, that's big. And then finally, Hamidou Diallo, who's the subject of the next question from unbiased Pistons fan. I should timestamp that one specifically. I am sort of intrigued that he hasn't been scooped up yet. And I kind of thought he would leave Detroit this summer, but I just don't know where the market is coming from. This is someone, yes, there are spacing limitations, but he just delivers really heady drives. He can shy away from contact and take off from weird angle points. The free throw shooting is certainly an issue, but he shot, I think it was after December 31st until he suffered that right ankle sprain. He shot like 48+% from mid range. And a lot of those were sort of pushes and extended layups, but he looked comfortable when he was turning a corner, using 1 or 2 dribbles and pulling up. If that part of his game is there, and look, you can explore his 3-point shot too. The Pistons and Diallo basically cut it from his diet by the end of when he was playing last season. A team with better spacing can either maybe try to get more out of him as a standstill shooter or just work around. If he was able to get to Boston, I just don't know why he ends up signing for a minimum type deal. He could be interesting in Dallas still. He could be interesting in Indiana, but they kind of already have that undersized wing type in Bruce Brown. Charlotte would be another team that I think he'd be a pretty good fit on. Utah, maybe Sacramento, just because they could use the defensive activity, but that's another one where it's like, could they get some real sized wings in there? Philly would be lucky if his market just craters, or they figure out the James Harden stuff and understand like what version of the mid level they're able to use. I think that could be a really good fit. So those are teams to keep an eye on. I guess my favorites would be Utah's not going to happen, but I would really like him in Utah and Philly, and then maybe Dallas just pivots there now that the Matisse Thybulle stuff is gone. Again, he's smaller, but he's at least a body that you can throw on like tougher covers. I'm not going to say premier scores and like all the way up to certain wings, but he has positional malleability there. And yeah, unbiased Pistons fan asking what's up with Hamidou Diallo not having a deal yet. He's probably, I didn't rank these, but so PJ Washington and like, are we sure anybody else is guaranteed to be better than Diallo? I'm more intrigued by Ayo Dosunmu, probably Kelly Oubre, maybe Christian. Like he has to be among the top 5 free agents left, right? Like that's just a fact at this point. Unbiased Pistons fan has a follow-up question, which I tried to really research and think about. Maybe I'm just not in the all-time, all-team mode, but Unbiased Pistons fan asks, I've been thinking a lot about an all-time, all too good for summer league team. Who should be on it? Jalen Williams, Keegan Murray, and LeBron James are who I have so far. That's an interesting 3, like 2 super recent dudes, and then LeBron James. So some of the names, I narrowed it down to 5 names, and at minimum, they had to play 2 summer league games. KD averaged 25 plus points on 45% shooting in 2 summer league games. Blake Griffin was at 19 and 10 on 50% shooting in summer league. Kawhi averaged 27, I think, on 47% shooting in summer league. LeBron, of course, dominated. I think he only played in 1 game, so that's like not fair, but I'll include him anyway. DeMar DeRozan was kind of smooth, and he, I think, played in like almost 10 summer league games. Maybe that defeats the purpose. We're talking about, oh, they're so good, they should have played in very few summer league games. And then the entire 2017 Lakers summer league team, which won the championship, but that had Kuzma is the one who stands out specifically. I think had that monster game either in the playoffs or in the actual championship. That's an interesting question, though. I will say, from what I've seen of summer league, where I haven't taken in any of the full games that have been on so far, but I've watched a lot of, not a lot of, I've watched some film on them, including of Julian Champagny for this next question. Keegan Murray looks, man, and I know that he was already mentioned, but if Sacramento's going to let him explore, geez, that's going to be an interesting, like, actual development. I don't mean like, oh, development, look, they're giving the ball. No, his development's going to be super interesting. Next question comes from Devin Vassell fan. Does Wemby have what it takes to overtake Julian Champagny as best player on the Spurs this year? No, he does not. But Julian Champagny, I will say, I knew very little about him, so I watched everything that he did in the summer league games so far, quote unquote summer league games so far. The 3-point shot looks legitimate, super comfortable when he's going and finishing with his right hand. He had a couple of attacks where he looked super at home going with his left hand. I don't know if he can really finish with that, would be a question. And there's like some real defensive and just his size, but 6'8", but kind of his activity, especially away from the ball and in passing lanes. That's like a dude. Like if you're looking to space the floor and plug and play, I would be very curious because he does look a little smooth with the ball in his hands. Could get choppy at points. Can he improve as kind of a passer? And we'll see if this translates to the regular Spurs, but he's been like sneaky on the offensive glass so far in summer league. And so like that's something to watch. That's a really good find. I understand now why people were so ecstatic about that contract. Devin Vassell fan though, second and more serious question. How confident are you in a lineup of Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sohan, Victor Wembanyama, and Zach Collins playmaking wise? I just don't see any of them getting benched for Trey Jones. I don't know where I land on whether I see any of them getting benched. You absolutely should be benching, I would say, Collins or Keldon Johnson, maybe even Jeremy Sohan. Like, you just need someone who can run the offense. And maybe that's Wembanyama and the combination of having, Devin Vassell's improved on-ball skills and the sample size you got from Jeremy Sohan last year. But it's not Zach Collins. We know it's not Keldon Johnson at this point. I would bring Keldon Johnson off the bench personally, but you gave him the extension, so I understand the reticence there. But just like the offense is potentially going to be a slog just because they're so young and they're working without that true captain or that floor general who, even with Trey Jones, is good at maintaining his dribble and getting in the lane, but doesn't have much of a 3-point shot. I just keep coming back to the ball control and how protecting possessions is going to be crucial for this team. Luka Doncic, LeBron James, and Dame Lillard and Trey Jones were the only players last year to post an assist rate above 30 and turnover rate below 12. It has nothing to do with him getting the contract, which might have been one of the best deals or was one of the best deals of free agency, might have been the single best deal of free agency, non-minimum division, of course. You need to figure out a way to get him. If you need to make it ceremonial just to not bruise egos, okay, whatever. But he needs to be like the point guard right now, unless you're going to join the Damian Lillard sweepstakes or try and take a look at another point guard. But I think that lineup, I'm very intrigued by it. And let's see what Wemby looks like, of course. I'm a big believer in on-ball Devin Vassell and Jeremy Sohan, but not right now. I think Trey Jones needs to be in there to organize it. And I would bench Keldon. But I think if you look at him right now, he's probably more plug and play than Jeremy Sohan. And so can you look at benching Jeremy and bringing him off the bench to try and run the second unit more, since you don't want to sandwich all your creators in the same lineup. They'll play a ton together no matter what, but you want to give your rotation some balance. So that's a way you could go. I think the least likely actually is probably you're not going to bench Collins just because you don't want to put Wembanyama in a position where he's technically the center. And then at that point, like, you're asking a lot defensively of Jeremy Sohan or Keldon Johnson. So I don't think ironically, I think so that the safe ones are Wemby. I would assume, I guess we shouldn't put it past the Spurs, but you're going to have Wemby, Vassell, and Collins are like your starters, unless the Spurs decide, hey, we want to throw another big in there where it's like, we're going to start a truer big in, I don't know, Charles Bassey or like, like they just don't even have him at that point. So yeah, maybe they bring back Gorgie Jang or something and decide that, but I think at this point, like, Zach Collins might be one of the safer ones. They have Reggie Bullock floating on this team now. Like, this team is just a lot of fucking wings. Remember when the Spurs just didn't have enough like perimeter players? This is incredible how far we've come. That's a great question though, and I'm interested to see how it plays out. And I want to know what you would do, Devin Vassell fan. I know it's not bench Devin Vassell. Ooh, this one's fun or potentially embarrassing. It comes from Real Syrup 2219. Do you have an offseason take about the draft or free agency that turned out to be epically incorrect and or downright embarrassing over the past few seasons? I'll share mine to get the ball rolling. It was spring 2019. Oh, we're painting a picture. My beloved Nuggets just lost a heartbreaking playoff series to the Blazers at home in Game 7 after being up 3-2. Much of the offseason scuttlebutt was about Michael Porter Jr., a young top 5 potential guy who was drafted in 2018 but didn't play his entire rookie year due to back surgery. Could he come in and be the final piece this roster needs to put them in true contender status? Not according to me. I'm tired of hearing about MPJ. As far as I'm concerned, he's now expendable because we just drafted Bol, end quote. Whew, that's spicy. That's right up there. Mine's worse, where I predicted Kawhi would be a bust. Trying to focus on more. Let's just focus on the last like 2 or 3 years. I missed on the Jalen Brunson signing. It was never the amount, but I had a problem with the mode of operations the Knicks took, as I stammer, to get there, and also just with what his fit would look like. I just underestimated him. That was a big miss. I didn't think Walker Kessler was going to be mobile enough to be an impact defender on the defensive end, like more away from the basket. I missed on, like, that's a wolf. And this is the worst one. And there are receipts on receipts on receipts of this because it's basically a joint one from Grant and I. This one's solo. I was not high on Evan Mobley. I thought he was very clearly like the worst of all those guys we were talking about between Scotty Barnes, Cade Cunningham, Scotty Barnes, and Jalen Green. And like, I might have had him below like 1 or 2 other guys. So I missed on that. Was pretty bad. The whole Evan Mobley and Jared Allen can't really work together. They do have warts. That was bad. This is the one, and it dovetails with Mobley and Allen can't work together. Grant and I called Jared Allen signing for 4 years and $100 million, one of the worst contracts of, what was that? Was that 2021 free agency? He has 1, 2, he's 3 more years left on his deal. So it was last season. my God, time is weird. So 2022 free agency. How's that for super recent? All these happened last summer, so we'll keep it super recent there. You go back to some of my older stuff, and my excuse was I was young and I was just trying to pump out as much content as possible. Like I probably wrote some pretty shitty stuff. My writing was probably even worse than it is now. But the Kawhi, I got called out, I think, by Cold Takes Exposed for it once, and Spurs Twitter went at me, and then they fell in love with me because I just owned it. I was like, yeah, I don't. This was terrible. I predicted he was going to be a bust. Now I would never write that. I won't predict busts. I'll write about busts that have happened or in the process of transpiring. I will never. Now that I'm more confident and kind of understand how shitty it is, to be frank, but you get to a certain point in your life, and also where you don't feel confident that you're indispensable in the industry because it says in my bio I'm professionally inessential, but I would never write something like that again. Apologies to Kawhi, but it seems like it worked out quite all right for you. Next question comes from HP Burgie, and I wish I could give this one more thought, but it's 4:30 in the morning by me, and I'm tired. And I did think about this. I think you'll see by my answers. Has two questions. Quick, what if Warriors draft LaMelo Ball instead of Wiseman? How does the landscape of the NBA change? I don't even want to answer that question because not that I don't want to answer it because it goes into what you're asking the next one. I think, yes, the Warriors would be infinitely better off in theory, but is LaMelo Ball allowed to be LaMelo Ball? Like he isn't. Like this season, LaMelo Ball is not going to happen where he was just chucking. Like that's just so much overlap with a Jordan Poole. Then would he have been given the freedom and the runway to make mistakes and develop as a facilitator? I think you can see that the IQ there is from LaMelo Ball to fit with the Warriors. And so how are the Warriors different? I mean, they're either probably talking about an extra championship from now. Um, like maybe there's, where they had the 2 gap years. Is it only one? I don't know. Or did they flip a LaMelo Ball for someone spicy? Like when they finally made that Jordan Poole trade, like let's say it gets to this point anyway, but you had LaMelo Ball this past season instead of Wiseman. Like who are we talking about on Golden State right now? Pascal Siakam, Damian Lillard himself. I don't know. So I think that's how it changes, but I don't want to spoil too much of your next question. And I think I deleted it here. And if I'm doing this unsolicited, I guess whatever, it is my podcast. But are there any other? No, there aren't any other what ifs. But I kind of thought of like it along similar lines. Well, no, it ties into your side question. So HP Burgie also asks, how much do you think role situation matter when it comes to players being bust or not? For example, would James Wiseman be an all-star if he was drafted by someone else? Counterexample, would LeBron have been not as good if he was drafted somewhere else? Basically, I'm asking if people's careers are predetermined or it's all up in the air. Can you think of some other examples where the team or player got drafted by a player that really mattered? So yeah, this is what I had marked. And I think one of the big ones is just like, okay, Thomas Robinson in Sacramento was that 2012? Would he still be in the league or been a much better player if he was able to develop outside of the Kings? And I think you could even ask that about Marvin Bagley III. I'm not trying to throw all this shit at the Kings, but it's a fair question. Never would have lived up to the Luka Doncic hype, of course. And then there's sort of the inverse, where it's like, well, what if Damian Lillard had gone earlier in 2012? And or you can even do it. We're talking about missed opportunities where is Chris Paul if he ends up in Atlanta in 2005. And so I think you could go back, like what if Steph Curry goes to a different team, yada, yada, yada. I think you get to a level of stardom that is always going to bust out no matter what. And maybe because it takes time, like Steph Curry might be an example, was not the best version of Steph Curry until later in his career. Would you not have been able to find that with certain teams who didn't eventually grow to understand or hire a coach that knew how to maximize or optimize his skill set, or at least grant him the freedom to be Steph and really just define the game that we're watching today? And so someone like LeBron James, I don't worry, like he always would have been transcendent. I do think Steph Curry, wherever he'd been, would have broken out. When it comes to guys, where is there sort of this untapped star potential? I guess I think a lot about Larry Markkinen a little bit in Chicago, where it's okay. Well, that was clearly Chicago and Cleveland, because you saw two situations where Chicago was just misusing him. He dealt with a bunch of injuries. There was log jams there, bad coaching, bad front officing, bad everything. Then he goes to Cleveland and he's solid, but he's not playing out of position at that point. He's shown he can play the 3, but he's not anything close to a focal point, even as a play finisher. Then he goes to Utah and really busts out because things are more built for him to have the freedom to do so. And then by necessity, like by exploration, he busts out, and then by necessity he becomes so central to everything that they're doing. And so I do think that it does matter where you're drafted and how you're used to an extent. When it gets to that level, though, it feels really rare. Now, James Wiseman, for example, what happens if he was on a team that ran a bunch of traditional pick and roll and just had pristine spacing? And I guess the Warriors had one or the other, but if had pristine spacing, ran a bunch of traditional pick and roll, and we're willing to kind of slog through his defensive mistakes and weren't on that immediate timeline. Could he be better? Could he be an all-star? It's just so tough to say. I do think when it comes to, I would say from like 1 or 2 time all-stars and below, like if that was their best case outcome, which I guess there's no way to know this, you're more likely to be impacted by where you're drafted than if you're just like a perennial all-star or an all-NBA, multi-time all-NBA type player, not sort of a one-off where Larry Markkinen. I'm not saying he's a one-off, but it'd be really mind melting if he didn't even make all NBA this year, but if he just starts contending for it. And there's also different scales of it where it's like, okay, well, Sabonis in Orlando and OKC was kind of nothing like we saw him in Indiana. Was that just a matter of waiting and time or actual situation? Was it both? So I think that level of star, again, someone who can make all NBA and maybe multiple all-star games, you can absolutely be shaped and see your career altered by where you're at. But I do tend to think that stardom will invariably break through. And so, like, even if it's a James Wiseman being on his third chance, I don't know if Detroit's the right ecosystem, especially, I mean, they have more shooting on that roster, but like just with Asar Thompson, his jump shot needs to come around. Cade Cunningham, Jay Ivey did improve there. So maybe there is enough spacing, especially when you're looking at Alec Burks, Bojan Bogdanovic, and now you have, I was about to say Cam Johnson, but it's actually Joe Harris there. Maybe you just see something. He seems like someone who needs to be the primary big. And if he's not just the primary big, it's almost like the inverse of John Collins, where, yeah, he needs to be a 5 on offense, but you might need him to be something less than that on defense. But I honestly, I don't know. You just have to kind of watch him, wait and see. So the one that I'm always fascinated by, though, is Frank Ntilikina, obviously. No, but is actually just, I mean, I'm not going to lie. Frank Ntilikina still fascinates me there. But Thomas Robinson's the one that I constantly come back to, where if he had ended up somewhere in Sacramento, he just had so many of the tools that I just feel like he could have been like just something on both ends of the floor. I'm trying to think of like a comp for him, and I don't really have a great one, like a Blake Griffin with defense or something. And maybe he never would have had that playmaking acumen, so that's not fair. That's a great question, though. Next question comes from Kill Hoss. Will you be watching Summer League games? And if not, will you at least review box scores? I'm sure I'll be watching some as I hopefully once I start feeling better, I will make sure to catch Wemby's debut. So I'll be watching some full Summer League games. I do a lot of more film rewatching, and yeah, you'll do box score diving, and then you'll try and look and be like, oh, I need to go watch that game or those players' possessions. To me, that's the most effective way to cover the league, especially when you're at the Summer League level, where a lot of it can become mundane for me at this point, guys. I'm not gonna lie, like this is the slog time, not just because I'm sick, but like I've gone through the entire regular season, the trade deadline, prepping off-season content, trying to keep track of the moves and the salary sheets. We're going to get into grades probably soon. And then it's, how much of the Summer League can I don't know what to read into it. And I tend to do less like box score informing, where it's okay, if I need to go, like I see a player over the last 10 games has done X in the regular season, I will take that and then try and go back and watch, or if I'm taking in full games at that point to see what I need to be watching for. In Summer League, I really do, like, that's where I rely on the eye test the most, which is maybe why I'm so bad at predicting Summer League success into like translating into the regular season. Although Desmond Bane, one of my bigger hits, when I saw him start handling the ball the summer before his sophomore season, I was like, I think that's what it was. This dude is going to break out. So my one hit, volume shooters don't always miss. So yeah, I will be watching summer league games, or at least film on it. I rely on the eye test a lot more than the box scores for those. And unless I'm covering it, and then you want box score contextualization, but I can tell you now, I don't think I'm going to be. Bleacher Report's tried to get me to go to Summer League multiple times. I always decline, in part because of just the anxiety of having to cover it with all those people there. And then two, just again, like I'm at the point where I'm like burnt out. And so we're going to reach a stage where I have time to take a breath, and like we're just going to turn around and maybe get into off season. Not maybe, I will get into off season look aheads unless something happens, like this podcast remaining wildly unprofitable at this stage. So yes, I will be watching Summer League. Definitely will catch Wemby's debut. And from what I can tell, Julian Champagny already looks like a future Hall of Famer. Next question comes from Moose Machine. The Bucks have, all things considered, had a pretty good summer so far, but seem to have a glaring hole at point guard. How should they fix that? They should get a point guard. Come on, Moose Machine. Any decent free agents left for minimum or any trade you could think of, they should swing. Also, Bucks fans seem obsessed with trading for Colin Sexton. Thoughts on his potential fit on the team and how feasible it is to trade for him. That's interesting. So I think it would probably come down to I'm very curious how Utah would value Colin. You can get his salary, by the way, but it's going to cost you players that you want. Like, so Colin Sexton's at 17.3 million this year. And so Milwaukee, it doesn't have to be dollar for dollar match, but it'll be 110%, I think. It's like you need to send out pretty close to that. You're gonna need to get rid of two of Bobby Portis, I guess Jay Crowder once he's trade eligible, Grayson Allen, Pat Connaughton. What does Utah evaluate him as? They do have Akbaji. They just drafted Bryce Sensabaugh. Uh, and they also have who's the other one? Then they draft another scorer that I'm forgetting. Let's look at their little sheet here. They extended Jordan Clarkson, and so he is still there. Keontae George, and so like having all those names, do they value Sexton less, even with Talon Horton Tucker being back? And then it's all right. You're not giving up your distant first. Are you going to give up Marjon Beauchamp, or let's just say, does this package of, let's say it's going to be great. I would say Grayson Allen and Pat Connaughton is the deal. Like, is that worth getting Colin Sexton? I mean, maybe. Does Utah even want a Grayson Allen reunion? I don't think you're giving up Bobby Portis in that deal. You could step out of your way to 3 salaries, where it's kind of like if it was one of Allen or Connaughton, and then you went to, like, are you going to give up Marjon Beauchamp like at that point, and then you give up another salary? I think that might get you pretty close, but not even there. It's tough for the Bucks to get to a number if you're willing to include Jay Crowder, but I just don't think Utah's going to want to be in the Grayson Allen or Jay Crowder business. Well, I shouldn't say that about Grayson Allen. It's a different front office, and ditto for Jay Crowder. I think he could be a good fit. That's just not someone who I view as a potential closer for them, just because you're looking at Brook, Giannis, Chris Middleton, and Drew. I guess you can close with Sexton, but then it's just you decided that Chris Middleton is your and Drew Holiday are wing defenders. And so you're going to be sacrificing something either at the point of the attack or on the wings there, which is why I might like Jay Crowder or even Pat Connaughton better in that. I might even, defensively, I won't like Malik Beasley. I thought that was an excellent flyer for them, by the way. In terms of free agent options, I don't really think there's anyone who could be a difference maker. If Ayo Dosunmu was just going to, Chicago's going to let him walk for the minimum to a division rival, conference rival, whatever. Yeah, I would love him. He doesn't provide, I think, the offensive juice you need, but just take the flyer. Does Goran Dragic do anything? Do you want to be the team that sees if Kemba's knees have anything left, or what's going on with John Wall? Frank Ntilikina is out there, and I heard that he's one of the best off the dribble jump shooters in the league of all time, actually. Taylor Maladone would be interesting. I do think he's on a 2-way with Charlotte, but he would be gettable. Does Patty Mills eventually get waived? That could be someone. Or what about a Devontae Graham? He's a partial guarantee for 24, 25, so maybe not. That might be something that's more midseason. Looking at trade targets, Trey Mann would be someone, Oklahoma City, very guard heavy at this point, and there's real shake and separation and bounce and directionality to his on-ball game. He will take step backs, he will get in the lane, hit floaters, create separation, react to sort of that chaos. He was just wildly inefficient this past year. Do you take a flyer on him? He has another year left on his rookie scale too, and so I don't know what the salary matching is. He's making such little money that you might have to do you double up on players, and you can't really do so until the middle of the season. I don't think the Bucks have any trade exceptions. Nope, they do not, that they can use here. So that's a little more complicated for them because they can only trade these bigger numbers where it's okay. Well, if you're willing to move Grayson Allen or Pat Connaughton for this guy, what else is the deal including? You're not getting Kendrick Williams for that. Are you going to take on Victor Oladipo's money, or Patty Mills and Trey Mann? Is that just the money for Grayson Allen or Pat Connaughton? Are you that out on any one of those guys? So it's a small number, but it's if you're making it over the offseason, it's actually kind of difficult for Milwaukee to pull off. Tyus Jones, his $14 million salary doesn't, better shooter than Trey Jones, definitely a better game manager as well, won't turn the ball over as much. Do you think he's going to close though? Him and Drew, I think you play him and Drew together. That's a dumb question. Again, you're making sort of the same defensive sacrifices. It's coming at the point of attack just because you're not going to, move. I guess you move Tyus to off guard, throw Drew point of attack, and Middleton on the wing. So there will be a defensive concession there. This is probably more of a midseason one, and they could get to the number depending on where the Nets go. Spencer Dinwiddie could be mega interesting for this team. And so those are all of the names that I thought of. Hope you enjoyed this sub 1 hour mailbag. Please, if you've gotten this far, you haven't done so already, subscribe, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, ratings and reviews. And if you've done all those things, please word of mouth and let me know if you've recommended the podcast to someone and they've actually tuned in. I don't get many of those messages. So those were always fun to see. And remember, Discord, link is in the podcast and YouTube description, socials, podcast, YouTube description, and buy merch, Hardwood Knocks merch. The link to that is in the podcast and YouTube description as well. Until next time, and as always, I hope to come at you with much more energy. I am Dan Favale. Shout out to the one, the only, the indelible, still a free agent somehow, some way, for inexplicable reasons, Frank Ntilikina.